Till that slaveholders in the U.S. knew that enslaved people were escaping to Mexico, the U.S. tried to get Mexico to sign a fugitive slave treaty, but Mexico refused to sign such a treaty, insisting that all enslaved people were free once they set foot on Mexican soil. The first article of the Mexican Constitution states that any fugitive slave that enters Mexican soil is automatically free whether he is a Mexican citizen or not and is fully protected by the law. This is my favorite bit of knowledge learned today. The audacity of being angry that your slave escaped. The town my family is from, Piedras Negras, was partially burned down when Texas Rangers were trying to recapture slaves but couldn't because the Mexicans helped fight along the freedman who made it to Mexico and prevented them from being taken. You know, the more I find out about slavery, the less I like it. Mexico? More like Mexibro. Isn't that part of why Jackson essentially stole Florida from Spain? A bunch of slaves from Alabama, Georgia and the Carolinas escaped to Florida, where they weren't slaves as long as they were self-proclaimed Catholics. Yeah. Seminole natives and fugitive slaves used the Spanish territory for protection. From there, they launched attacks on American settlements and raids on nearby plantations, respectively. So President James Monroe called on Jackson to lead forces into the area. Through ambiguously worded orders, Monroe may have given Jackson permission to attack the natives within Spanish territory, but the president later denied he had done anything of the kind. Nonetheless, Jackson would not be deterred anyway. He considered the Spanish settlement in the Americas a scourge of the earth, his hatred of the Spanish second only to his hate of the British. Jackson therefore led 2,000 troops across the border into Florida, seizing the town of St. Marks. In short order, he captured both Arbuthnot and Ambrister, tried them, and sentenced them to death. Leaving 200 troops behind to protect Fort Marks, Jackson left for Fort Gadsden. Along the way, he met little resistance from the natives, who knew him by his vicious reputation and figured it wise not to fight him. While Jackson's actions up to this point could be defensible under international law, his next actions precipitated a major crisis. He seized the Spanish capital and the governor of Florida, announcing himself the new leader of the area until the transaction can be amicably adjusted by the two governments. Vicente Guerrero, the president at the time, was also Afro-Mexican. What a thing to ask of him. Ignorance in our government runs deep. Is there a reason history classes focus on slaves escaping to Canada but don't mention them escaping to Mexico? Texas was a sparsely populated desert with a few thousand inhabitants. Not many people escaped that way. The North was home to powerful abolitionist movements. Many of those states abolished slavery pre-Revolutionary War, tons of money, and was right next to the more densely populated sections of the Southern slave economy. Abolitionists that went on to fight the Confederates were involved in the Underground Railroad. Mexico stayed out of it. The westward expansion, the war with Mexico, a lot of that was about cutting off avenues of escape for slaves. A lot of early American history centers around slave owners trying to protect their rights to own slaves. The only solution is to build a border wall and make Mexico pay for it. Chingan. Are there any interesting stories of escaped slaves who made a life for themselves in Mexico? Yup, and Mexico's second president Vicente Guerrero abolished slavery before the U.S. did. What's the Mexican equivalent of Chad? The title of the post does a great job on its own in stating how much early America relied on and reveled in the subjugation of human beings based on skin color. The article ups the ante. Mexico abolished slavery in 1829 when Texas was still part of the country, in part prompting white, slave-holding immigrants to fight for independence in the Texas Revolution. Once they formed the Republic of Texas in 1836, they made slavery legal again, and it continued to be legal when Texas joined the U.S. as a state in 1845. Makes me wonder why Mexico doesn't have a larger black population still. Even along the Caribbean coast, like many Central American countries do. Veracruz has a big Afro-Mexican community. It's because they are mixed in. Interracial marriage was legal in Mexico so people from all ethnicities could marry each other. The USA could have very well been a place with its own ethnicities like Mexico, but they decided to keep everyone separate. Unlike the US, Mexico has had a number of constitutional documents, and also unlike the US, every single one of them has declared that slavery is illegal. And I quote, "The Constitution of 1843 in Mexico preserved a good part of the legislative achievements promoted by the liberals, among others the abolition of slavery, freedom of the press and of opinion, personal security and the inviolability of property and domicile. The Constitution of 43 says, no one is a slave in the territory of the nation, and whoever is introduced will be considered in the free class, remaining under the protection of the laws." This same principle was embodied in the constitutions of 1857 and 1917. The one of February 5, 1857 states in its Article 2, "In the Republic everyone is born free. The slaves who set foot on the national territory regain their freedom by that fact alone and have the right to the protection of the laws." And that of February 5, 1917, Article 2, "Slavery is prohibited in the United Mexican States. The foreign slaves who enter the national territory will achieve their freedom and protection of the laws by this fact alone, so Mexico is the land of the free. Viva Mexico." They taught this to us in Mexico when I lived there, so you could imagine my surprise when I moved to the States and black people were just as racist as white people towards us. I've mentioned this before and get downvoted, but as a Mexican all the racism I've experienced living in the US is from black people. I know white people might have been racist too, but they were never racist to my face, while black people have said mean things to me for no reason. So even those bad hombres knew that slavery was fucked up? Which is funny considering Mexico had a huge part in the Native American genocide that occurred. They were killing them in droves from the south while America was pushing farther and farther west, putting even more pressure on them. That is why Afro-Mexicans exist. We also have a lot of Chinese and Japanese descendants living in Mexico. Slavery was a primary factor in Texas declaring independence from Mexico, since Mexico had abolished slavery shortly after achieving independence from Spain. Mexico has a similar racial diversity to the US. When a regular American thinks Mexican as a genetic racial group, they think what is really mestizo, which is the mixed heritage of European settlers/conquerors, and Native Americans, but that is neither the only race in the country nor does it comprise the Hispanic ethnicity of native Spanish speakers in its entirety. The U.S. counted Hispanic as white for most of its history, which is why surveys of racial data now refer to non-white Hispanic or some variation. Mexico's welcome of escaped slaves is, in large part, a major contributing factor. Its demographics largely map to the U.S. between black, white, mestizo etc. when you don't count speaks Spanish natively as a racial group. It doesn't help that every American representation of Mexico is a country perpetually in sepia tone occupied entirely by various clones of Danny Trejo. It's like with Spain. Spain let them be free, but they did have to convert to Catholicism and serve in the military during their war.